as just numbers or some kind of an abstraction, then you probably forget your real intent, which is to craft these great human experiences. So we have to remember that data isn't something that pulls us further away from humans, but because it's a representation of people, it's actually something that should be bringing us closer to people. When I think about the responsibility of the designer in all of this, fundamentally the designer is, of course, creating product experiences. But also, I think a new responsibility that we have to take on is actually thinking about how we design the data and actually getting dirty with the data. Rolling up your sleeves and really engaging in that conversation and driving the conversation about what data are we collecting and why are we collecting that data. Something to remember is that the designs that we make ultimately dictate what kind of data you are actually collecting. And so, for example, if you create a design that doesn't have a button that says click here, you will never get data that says how many people clicked that button. On the other hand, if you create a design that has a huge blinking red button, of course you're going to get data that says, oh, a lot of people clicked that button, right? But you have to ask how much of that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. How much of your design drove that kind of data that you collected. So I think the responsibility of the designer is to remember their role in all of this. And ultimately, the data that we're collecting is somewhat limited by the designs that we're making. And the designs that we're making is actually limited by the talent, the skill, and the capability of the designer who's crafting that design. So for the designer, it's really important to remember their role in all of this and to remember the people that are behind the product that they're trying to craft. So another thing to remember is that the metrics that we're using to measure the success of our products are also being tested over time. And we're constantly using those metrics to see whether or not we're measuring the right things. Are we really measuring the things that are important for our business? And in that way, data creates this ongoing cycle where we're constantly honing our own instinct and skills about what's working for our customers. When I think about the different ways that you can use data to shape your products, there's really 3 different approaches that people often talk about. So one is data-driven, where you have a very specific question that you're asking, and in that case, maybe the data can actually answer it. So it's very specific question and a very specific answer that the data can actually give you. We also think about data-informed design as another framework, and that's where we're actually acknowledging that it's a little bit more nuanced, that data might be just one of many things that goes into helping you make your decision. One of the many things that goes into helping you inform that decision. The other things might be experience or gut or instinct or other information that you've gathered about what's working with your product or strategy. Then you take data with a bit of a pinch of salt, right? The last thing that I think about, though, as a framework is data-aware design. And with data-aware design, it's really acknowledging that design is this creative process, and we're not just designing the product, but also designing the data itself, and engaging in that cycle of whatever it is that we design gives us back data. And so design is both dictating to the data, but also taking back from the data. So choosing which of those 3 frameworks that I just outlined, that is really up to you and to your product team to decide which one works best for you in which situations. There's no one of those that's absolutely correct, right? It really depends on the situation and what kinds of questions you're trying to answer. We have to remember that there's sometimes when data really does have the answer and sometimes where it doesn't. And what's important is to be smart about knowing which situation you're in and when you're in that situation. If we just start to assume that it's very black and white or there's only one way, then I think we have lost a bit of the creativity in our work. I think a lot of people ask, what are the concerns about engaging in a data-driven, data-informed, or data-aware framework for design? But really the responsibility lies on the designer. Ultimately they need to define what their relationship is with using data, and they have to remember that it's not something that they are victim to, but actually something that they need to leverage. It's just one of the many tools that is in their toolkit. And so usually when people start to feel like they're being squeezed by a data framework or that they're losing creativity, sometimes they have to turn that question back on themselves and say, you know, am I thinking at the right level? Are we asking big enough questions, and what is it that I'm trying to answer? And I think that's the best way to make sure that we're disciplined about not falling to some of the common pitfalls in data framework with design. It's too easy to lose sight of the user in these situations, or it's too easy to fall into situations where you're optimizing for local maxima. But ultimately, some of the big inspiration for leaps in product ideas and strategy have to come from designers and have to come from people who are really thinking about their end user. So the data won't give you that inspiration. It can help you to understand how well you're doing and how good a job you're doing at delivering a great experience for your customers, but it may not give you that core inspiration. That really has to come from yourself. Having worked at two companies, Netflix and Spotify, that really leverage data and design, one of the most important things that I've learned is that you can't lose sight of the user and all that data. Ultimately, creating great experiences for people is the reason that we get up every morning and go to work and work really, really hard to craft these delightful experiences. And ultimately, that's the reason that you all use our product. Thanks so much for letting me come and speak to you at Sime. I hope you're having a great time, and hopefully some of this conversation has actually sparked some ideas for you to take back and try out yourself. If you're ever in the neighborhood, stop by Spotify and say hello. I'll be happy to show you around.